Coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast, Jon Schaffer from Iced Earth does his first interview in over 4 years. I talk about the upcoming album by Onslaught called Origins of Aggression, and I recap the interview I did with guitar player Nige Rocket, and I review the WASP compilation that was released digitally, which contains B-Sides and rarities. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings and welcome back to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you. Really excited to be here with everybody today on this fake spring here in Ohio. And I have a lot to talk about as always. If you'd like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any kind of content. And if you follow this show on any other form of social media, by all means, hit the subscribe button or follow the show there. Have a lot to get to, as always, and I'm going to be reviewing the upcoming album by Onslaught called Origins of Aggression. As those of you that actually watch the program, you saw that I did speak to Nige Rocket, the guitar player, and of course one of the founding members of Onslaught, a really great guy, and I will be delving into that release and that interview later on in this episode. W.A.S.P, of course, also puts out a digital-only compilation of B-Sides and rarities. I have a lot to talk about there. Most of those, of course, were bonus tracks on the various reissues that have come out over the years, and they just put out a brand new box set, reissuing a lot of those albums as well. But first, I want to start off the show with something that many of you have written me about, have messaged me about, have emailed me about, whatever. I'm going to start the show off by talking about Jon Schaffer from Iced Earth doing his first interview in over 4 years. Now, obviously, for those of you that follow the show, you know that Jon has been a big subject on the show. I had a whole entire discussion, like a roundtable discussion with two really good people, Christian Wentz and Justin Roth. We talked about Jon's situation, how he can restart his career. We went through all of that. And of course, I made my opinion very clear about what I thought of Jon, the impact that he's had on me as a music fan. And I had a lot of viewpoints, and mostly speculative viewpoints, because we haven't heard an interview from him until now. Very recently, an interview was put out. Jon talked about everything, and that interview was a pretty deep one. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on that interview because a lot of you have messaged me about it. And I'm also going to talk about a couple of things that I personally I feel I was wrong about when speculating about Jon. And even one of the criticisms I had about Jon, I'm really not as, how shall I put it? I'm really not as adamant about that criticism anymore. In fact, I think I was wrong about something I criticized him for. So I'm going to kind of retract that and tell you why now that I've seen an interview with Jon. So with that said, let me recap some things. First of all, watching him talk, you can tell, and listening to him talk, you can tell this man has been through some shit. I mean, let's call it what it is. He's been through a lot over the last 4 years, especially for somebody who pretty much his biggest crime was trespassing. Looking at the lawsuit, listening to Jon talk, Jon was in the Capitol building no more than 5 to 10 minutes. Jon did not hurt anybody. Jon did not beat on anybody. He pointed his finger and yelled at some people. He ended up getting tear gassed or pepper sprayed. I don't remember what Jon exactly said about that. And he was in and out of that building very quickly. And the next morning, the guy wakes up and finds out he's on the most wanted list. The man was in solitary confinement for a little over 3 months under some pretty horrendous conditions. There have been a lot of strained relationships He talked about that in the interview with the family. His career was pretty much destroyed, not really destroyed completely, but obviously it was put on hold. And the income stream from that career was obviously pretty much not what it was, obviously. And of course, he had to pay for a legal defense. So the man over the last 4 years has more than paid for what ultimately is trespassing. And that is it. Let me get that out of the way, because there are idiots out there calling this guy a terrorist. He's definitely not, especially when a lot of those people that are calling this guy terrorist for walking into a building and yelling at some people are the same people, many of the same people, condoning people torching Tesla dealerships or getting out and beating people up or assaulting people or intimidating people driving Teslas, who, by the way, probably voted against the same person that they don't like. And there's a lot of hypocrisy that goes into that. There's a lot of hypocrisy when the fact that you had so many government buildings over the summer before this whole Capitol January 6th nonsense happened, where people breached those buildings, where people did billions of dollars in damage to a lot of cities out there. And I want to put that in perspective, because Jon walked into a building with a can of bear spray in a water bottle, didn't hurt anybody, didn't kill anybody, yelled at some people, got pepper sprayed and left. I want to make sure that is abundantly clear, because for whatever reason, you have a small group of people that are holding on to this ridiculously stupid narrative. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later on. Now, were there people at the Capitol that probably did some stuff they shouldn't have? Absolutely. Not even going to say that didn't happen. But in Jon's case, considering he was all of about 4 or 5 sentences in a very large lawsuit, all he did was walk in, yell at some people and leave. Go home, take a shower. Went to the hotel, took a shower, went home. So I'm going to talk about his interview, folks, because there's a lot that I took from it. It was a very deep conversation, and there's a lot to get into. And again, there was a criticism I had of Jon that now, hearing him speak about it, I don't really have that criticism of him anymore. So let's start off with, what did I think of the interview? Obviously, Jon has definitely been through some stuff. But what the biggest thing that I took from this interview had nothing to do with any of the books he talked about, which I've read most of those. It had nothing to do with the January 6th stuff. It had nothing to do with any of that. You know what it had to do with? Jon talked about doing a lot of self-reflection. And the one thing that forces people to change their lives for the better and do a lot of self-reflection is for something not only traumatic to happen in your life, but for you to go through such a bad experience you hit beyond rock bottom, further down to where you could ever imagine you would be. And I say that because I've been through that. I'm not going to go into the complete details of my own experience and what happened. I'm just going, for those of you that know me, you probably know what I'm talking about. But let's just say I came within an inch of instantly losing my life. And as a result of everything that happened with that, I took a long look at my own life, who I was as a person, and I made a lot of changes for the better. I am definitely not the same person I was. Now, this happened probably about 5.5 years ago. Yeah, around 5.5 years ago now. In August of this year, it'll be 6 years. So from that aspect, I can relate to Jon, because basically during that interview, he talked about doing a lot of self-reflection. And I guess when you're in solitary confinement under some bad conditions for 3 straight months, you're going to have a lot of time to do a lot of self-reflecting. And that's what he did. And I believe, despite all the nonsense he had to deal with over 4 years, he has probably, from what people told me that know him, he's become a better person as a result. So I can relate to him when it comes to that. And there's another aspect of this interview I can also relate to. He talks about the fact that he found out who his real friends were when he hit a massive low point in his life when all this happened. He refers to the people that he was in a band with, his bandmates. He refers to, probably generally other people that were part of his life that pretty much abandoned him. And I'm going to go into more detail on that because of the fact that there's an aspect of that I'm going to refer to when it comes to, his, former, band members, because that was something I emphasized and talked about numerous times on this show. But essentially, I found out the same thing when I went through the experience I went through. Now, I want to keep in mind too, folks, what I went through is nowhere close to what Jon went through. I can tell you flat out right now, listening to him talk, I didn't go through anything close to what he has dealt with. But I can relate to a lot of what he said in this interview from that aspect alone. So let's debunk a couple myths. And I'm going to basically go back and admit that I am wrong about one aspect of this as well. So one of the biggest criticisms that, first of all, when I did all of these discussions about Jon on my program, I would say 95% of the people that made comments or wrote me about it, the amount of people that were just happy about the fact the guy's out of jail and want to see Iced Earth come back was astounding, because I was expecting to get a ton of people coming after me over even bringing the guy's name up. Like Justin Roth talked about a guy having a meltdown just bringing up Jon's name on a podcast, which will never come out, when he was on doing the discussion with myself and Christian. But I'm going to be honest, there's a couple of myths we need to debunk. Now, one of the criticisms, this was one of the few criticisms that were brought up in the comments, is that, in all of these press releases and articles that were coming out about Jon, they were talking about Jon going into witness protection. They were talking about Jon and the fact that he's a sellout and he's selling out his fellow Oath Keeper members, et cetera, et cetera. But then when you hear Jon's side of the story, he had no information about anything going on with them. He was a member, but he wasn't he didn't know the ins and outs of what was going on. He had no information to give them. So in reality, he didn't turn on anybody. Because here's the thing, and for those of you that are saying, oh, well, Jon says that, but he probably did. Well, guess what? Jon isn't in witness protection. Pretty much it's very evident what church he goes to. So if he really had any information and he was ratting anybody out, he probably would be in witness protection, but he is not, which means he did not have any information, and it means that he did not rat anybody out. So let's put that to bed right now. The next thing he talks about is the band members abandoning him. Not everybody, but some of his band members abandoned him. If I were to look at the personnel list of people in Iced Earth, if you look at who was in the band at the time, I'm pretty sure I could probably pick out the one or two people that probably abandoned him, right? But I'm not going to go into detail on that. But for the sake of argument, let's talk about that. My biggest criticism of Jon, and Justin brought it up in the roundtable discussion we had, which was, by the way, a great thing to do because there were a lot of different aspects to this that I never had thought of, is the fact that he put his band members in a bad position by doing what he did. Now, I was very critical of that. In fact, I've mentioned that numerous times. That was one of the things, because what I did is I initially made a statement about it when it happened, and then I shut up about it until Jon made his first statement, because it wasn't fair for me to talk about anything until he actually made some kind of statement. That was a statement through his lawyers. But now listening to him and what he said about that, he was talking about these band members abandoning him. And here's how I took that. There was a point in the roundtable discussion about Jon, which I'll put in the show notes, by the way. Christian talked about the fact that he doesn't believe anybody there would have known that that whole January 6th protest would turn into the fiasco that it was, or that it would be made out to be as big of a deal as they made it out to be. Jon said the same thing. He said he went into the building and he was out. He didn't think it was that big of a deal. He figured, okay, I got pepper sprayed. I'm done. I'm going to go back home and go about my business. Then dude wakes up one day. He's on the most wanted list, has to call a lawyer and surrender himself, because he did. He didn't go on the run, didn't avoid authorities. He took accountability and he went and surrendered himself. That was something the judge said in his court documents, if you look at his sentencing hearing, because I read all of that. I don't think he realized that this would be as big of a fiasco as it was, because I think if he did, I think there is a good chance cooler heads probably would have prevailed, and he may not have walked into the building. He may have protested, but he may not have gone in there. So now knowing that, my perspective has changed on that. Because I don't think he knowingly would have, now this is just me, I am speculating, but I do not believe this guy, if he would have known by simply walking into the building, would have ruined his career, would have potentially ruined him financially, and would have had an effect on people he was in a band with. He might not have done it. He might have protested, not walked into the building. He might have left. And he would have probably had another album written about all the ridiculousness that has gone on over the last 4 years. So my stance on that has softened quite a bit. So listening to that interview, he's obviously found religion. Some people made some critical comments about that. Here's my thing. I'm not the most religious person out there, but if that is what makes you a better person, if that is what makes you reflect on your life, if you find something in anything, religion, it could be anything, philosophy, that makes you a better person, all power to you. He's obviously found something in religion, in God, in Jesus, that has really changed him as a person, probably for the better. From what people that I know have told me, and from listening to that interview and watching that interview, I believe that this is exactly what has happened with him. Now, a couple other aspects of this I'm going to touch on really quick. There was a list of books that are in the comments. I've read probably 3/4 of those books, not all of them. There was one he recommended. I can't remember what it was now. I did order it on Amazon because I ordered like 5 books on that list that I hadn't read. I've read most of that stuff. And the interesting part, and I've read books that actually have to do with a lot of what Jon talks about and what's listed in there that he doesn't have listed in there. But what's interesting is that a lot of that stuff, you have seen a lot of alternative media and podcasts that are now bringing more and more of that stuff to light. And so what I hope happens is that once Jon gets himself settled in, once he starts talking more, once he starts doing more interviews, I really hope that he also continues to talk about those things that, he's been talking about, starting with the Sons of Liberty album. I think it's important. Now, I could sit here and talk for 7 hours about all of that stuff. I have friends of mine that follow it closely. I have a lot of friends in bands that follow it closely. But I'm just, folks, I would definitely check out the list of books listed in that first interview that he just did. I'm going to put that interview in the show notes because there's a lot of very eye-opening stuff there. I started reading a lot of that stuff probably back in 2014, 15, 2016. There's a couple of those books that are super long. And the problem with me with books isn't that I have a lack of attention span. It's the fact that, like, if I go and start reading something, I drown everything out for like 2 or 3 days. And unfortunately, with everything going on in life, I can't do that. So I suggest checking those out because there is a lot of truth in that. A lot of truth. I've studied a lot of so many different aspects of this. And a lot of what Jon talks about in that interview, he does go into, not into super detail about it, but he definitely does touch on a lot of that. He did talk about, the election, the stolen election, as as people call it. And his thing, and this is something that I think should be noted, because he felt that the election was possibly stolen in 2020. I'm using his words, not mine. That it would have been equally as bad if the election had been stolen from the Democrats. Jon's an American. Jon already acknowledges that both political parties have a lot of people that are corrupt. And I agree with that. I am a nonpartisan. I am not somebody that completely worships the Democrats or the Republicans. I'm not. Politics is the new religion, folks. People have a religious aspect. There's a religious following like aspect to politics. And I don't worship one party or the other. I'm an independent. 25 years ago, I was considered a liberal. Now I'm considered just right of center. And my political views have not changed. So he did say something like that. And I think it's important that, because people think he's automatically some Republican, and he's not. Because he talks about how both parties are pretty much corrupt. But Jon believes in the Constitution. I agree with him. He believes in the right to protest, and that's what he thought he was doing until suddenly his name is all over the news, his face is all over the internet, and then we have this situation. And I'm going to go into one last aspect of this. I'm going to go into the haters. Pearl clutchers, the people that are holding on to this narrative that Jon is some kind of terrorist. I don't know about you folks, but we're like, people that think he was a terrorist and they were going to like take over the government, and somehow everybody there was going to overpower all the intelligence agencies and the military. Come on, folks, really? The United States has the best military. We have the best intelligence agencies in the world. We have the best law enforcement agencies in the world. You know what else we have? The most armed citizenry in the world. Now, last time I checked, when people want to take over a country, they're going to be armed. I didn't see Jon with a rifle. I saw him with a can of bear mace, which is really more of a defense thing than anything, and a water bottle. And there are people still clutching to this narrative that he's some kind of terrorist. And the thing that's funny about that, Christian Wentz brought this up in our discussion, which again, as I'll say, is in the show notes. He said that the people that are really complaining about this are either people that already didn't like Jon and are looking to kick him when he's down, which there are a lot of those people. There are people that have worked with him at record labels and I'm not going to name any names, that are doing that, which says all we need to know about their character or lack thereof. But you also have people that are grasping onto that narrative because they don't want to let go of that narrative because they don't want to be wrong. Because when people feel they are wrong about something, They feel like power is being taken away from them, and it hurts their ego. And those people are like the one squeaky wheel out of the 4,000 shopping cart wheels at Walmart. They make the most noise, but it's very clear, a clear majority of people support Jon, want him to come back at some point and create music again and inspire everybody like he did before. And they're not grasping onto this. In fact, the interesting part about that is when I looked at my original post, when it all went down, all of it, I looked at my original post, people that were commenting, being critical of Jon, saying he'll never listen to Iced Earth again. Those same people are saying they want him to come back. Many of them, actually. Now, Jon talked about people having to drop their ego in this. I agree. It's a very difficult thing to do. You have to pretty much train yourself to let go of that. I am somebody that had to do that. I used to have an ego that was pretty destructive to me progressing as a human being. But I let go of that 5.5 years ago when I had a wake-up call. So that's pretty much where I stand on the interview with Jon Schaffer. I wish him the best. Hopefully one day I will be able to talk to him on this program. Jon was one of many bands in the very beginning of this show who were very cool to me, who treated me really well. And he was one of many people who my encounter with him was positive. It made me want to continue to host this program as a radio show for 25 years and now as a podcast. And that's where I'm going to leave it right now. One last thing. When he talked about these haters that were going after him, a lot of these haters are going after his band members. This is something I left out, forgot to say. When Jon says the band members abandoned him, I don't think he was talking about them initially, like quitting the band when they were getting the cancel culture mob coming after them. Folks, I remember looking at the Blind Guardian page. I was in the comments sticking up for Hansi Kirsch. There were people calling Hansi every name in the book, making threats, all sorts of stuff. And he probably had no idea what the hell was going on. He probably didn't know what was going on with Jon. Now, I don't know what their relationship is now. Maybe they've talked. But when Jon talks about band members abandoning him, my guess is he's talking about when he ended up getting out of jail, making contact with them. He's talking about the people that wanted to have nothing to do with him. I don't think Hansi is probably that person. I could be wrong. But Hansi in an interview even came out and said Jon deserves a second chance. And Hansi was always a good dude to me. Again, he's another one, just like Jon and quite a few other bands out there that I had on the first year I did this show, that are the reason this show has continued for almost 30 years. So I wish Jon the best. I hope, the damage has been done. Sadly, he's one of the fortunate people to get out of jail quickly, because there are people that were thrown in there without any due process, without their constitutional right to a speedy trial. And as Jon mentioned in the interview, those folks had defense attorneys, and this is Jon's words, not mine. They had defense attorneys that hated them and did not want to represent them. It's a very sad story. When I was watching that interview and listening to it, there was a bit of sadness in that interview. There really was. But I look forward to hopefully seeing Jon making music yet again. I hope that he reissues some more of Iced Earth's back catalog. It'd be really cool to collect some of that. I think it would be cool to even reissue some old shirts and old shirt designs. I know he's selling some vintage shirts on there now, but this has been a crazy thing to have happen to somebody, and it's a perfect example. I understand wanting to make an example of people that went and protested. Were there people there that took things too far? Yes. Were there assets there escalating things? Absolutely. Because that has come out. But overall, I just hope Jon does well. I hope he makes a comeback. There are people in the metal scene that have done far more egregious things than him, who for whatever reason don't get tons of backlash. I don't know why. But I really hope he creates music again and inspires people again in the same way that he did before all of this happened. And that's where I'm going to actually leave it now. I'm going to go into break. When I come back, I'm going to review the new Onslaught, or the upcoming Onslaught album, Origins of Aggression. And I'm going to talk about the upcoming W.A.S.P compilation entitled B-Side. I think it's called B-Sides and Rarities. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command Podcast. Hey everybody, it's Tony here from the Metal Command Podcast. I appreciate you watching this program, and if you want to see more of what I offer on this show, please by all means hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, follow me on any other social media outlet that you see this program, and again, I appreciate all of your support. Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you, and now it's time to talk about something fun, and that is the upcoming Onslaught album, Origins of Aggression, which comes out May 23rd, 2025. I believe that's the release date. I had Nige Rocket, one of the founding members of Onslaught and one of the guitar players in the band. Really awesome dude. He's been on my radio show before multiple times. Now, getting to talk to him face-to-face in an interview setting was just a lot of fun. And this compilation, or this album itself, is really, really cool. So let me kind of go through what this album is all about before I get into some of the aspects of it. So the album, it's a double album. The first part of that double album are re-recorded songs from the band's back catalog, basically from the first three albums they put out. And Power from Hell, The Force, and In Search of Sanity, those three albums. So it has re-recorded versions of those songs. And then there's the second part of the album, which has a bunch of covers that the band does. So let me talk about the first aspect of this, and then I'll get into the cover songs here in a second. So the first three Onslaught albums, especially the first two, it was really nice to hear re-recorded versions of those. So normally, I don't really care for bands when they re-record something. I don't really care for bands when they, go and try to make an updated version of an album. But in this case, in regards to Onslaught and their earlier material, I'm all for this. These songs are updated. They sound phenomenal. They sound a lot better than the originals. I know The Forest had a little bit of a better production than the debut album did. And same with In Search of Sanity. But I think it was nice to hear some updated versions of these songs. And, Onslaught, Dave, their singer, I did touch on this aspect in the interview, which will be in the show notes, but they have a great singer too. This is a band that I have loved for years. And the interesting part about these re-recorded versions, the most interesting song in that list of tracks, because I expected the other songs to sound the way that they basically did, but the one song that was interesting to hear was the song In Search of Sanity. I say that because that was the third Onslaught album. It was, how do I say this, watered down from what they had done musically before. and they re-recorded it. Now, the original version had Steve Grimmett from Grim Reaper, who's not a thrash metal singer at all. May he rest his soul. Steve Grimmett, a phenomenal vocalist. But the way that album went and the direction that it went into, Nige was really not happy about that because it was pressure from the record label to make a record like that. But they did a re-recorded version of it with Dave, their singer, the thrashier version of it, which is the way that they intended for it to sound. And to elaborate more on that, let me go back to the interview I just did with Nige Rocket, where he talks about the song In Search of Sanity being re-recorded and gives a backstory behind it. Check this out. The interesting re-recorded track, probably the most interesting one on there, because I think, first of all, we'll get to Dave here in a minute, but I think he's an outstanding choice for a vocalist for this band, with just his voice and how he sounded on, the Generation Antichrist album and just how he sounds on these songs. But the interesting song for me, which sounds different than the original, is going to be In Search of Sanity. Much different album, much different vocalist than Steve Grimmett, who is sadly not with us anymore. And was it challenging to do that? Because, all the other songs are pretty in your face, straight ahead, brutal. But In Search of Sanity was a big departure from what you guys, and I think that album was actually very good, but it's a big departure from your normal sound. And what was it like thinking about, why did you decide to actually re-record that song? And, was it kind of difficult to approach it with his style of singing?
No, it's something I've wanted to do, and the band want to do as well for some time. This is one album we want to re-record in full, which we will do. We've discussed it with the label already. We will record that album in future, because for me, it wasn't a true Onslaught album, I love the songs on it. Songs are fantastic, but due to, let's call it, label interference, etc., that album never came out how it should have been. It was very watered down in its sound, and with the addition of Steve Grimmett, may he rest in peace, great vocalist, absolutely great vocalist, but not really the right guy for Onslaught, I don't think. And a lot of people like it. It gave us a whole new fan base, but I think it kind of alienated some of the older fan base as well that didn't really appreciate that. And for me, it kind of it's haunted me a little bit, because it just never turned out how I envisaged that album to go, Especially after the demos we'd done with Psychea. They sounded like a natural progression on from The Force. But it just wasn't to be with that record. So it's important to me in the future to make that album and do it how I felt it should have been first time round. Yeah. So the weird thing about, obviously, we wanted to make it heavier, more aggressive, but usually Dave likes to have myself and a producer in when he's doing his vocals, but he went away and done this on his own at home. I don't know why. Because it was a big challenge for him to do, to match up or even go one step better than Steve Grimmett. Obviously not copying his voice at all, but delivering it in his style,
right?
And how Onslaught wanted it to be right now. And he went away and did this on his own without any kind of direction or guide from us at all. And as soon as it came back to me, I was like, wow, this is fucking incredible. He's really fucking nailed it and changed some important things. I mean, that he wasn't necessarily going to hit. I mean, he can hit some notes, man, but obviously Steve was right out there with his high vocals, but they've changed some things to take it other ways, and it sounds incredible. I think he's done an absolutely amazing job on it, and I'm so pleased with that track. Probably the most, for me, is the most pleasurable track on that album.
Yeah, he definitely brought new life into that song. You know, when I heard that, actually, I'm not going to lie to you. When I saw that was on the track list, when I got the promo, I went to that song first because I wanted to see what that was. I knew the other songs, because Dave's vocals are very good. I knew the other songs would easily sound very good, and they do. But that was the curiosity for me.
Yeah.
And It's always interesting when you talk about how the demos from that In Search of Sanity album actually sound different than how it turned out. Did his vocals on In Search of Sanity, is it close to what the demo sounded like, or is it, slightly different?
Well, I don't even have copies of those demos anymore. I don't know where they are. I'm stupid in the fact that I don't ever collect anything.
Yeah.
And I don't even have any of the demos from back in '82 or nothing like this. It's stupid, but I don't have copies, so we didn't have any reference to that either. So
okay.
all I remember it was with Cy singing in his style of The Force, and it was a lot dirtier and a lot heavier than what the album version was. So Dave had no reference to go to on that, and neither did we, and he just delivered big time.
And that's Nige Rocket talking about In Search of Sanity, the re-recorded version. I would love to hear the demos he refers to with Cy Keeler singing on the demos for that album, because obviously that record turned out a lot different, bringing Steve Grimmett into the band to sing a lot of those songs, which, kind of judging by what Nige Rocket says in that interview segment, that the current version they re-recorded for In Search of Sanity was more along the lines of how the band intended it to sound. But I did ask him, obviously he doesn't have any of those, demos anymore, but it would be interesting to find those and hear what they sounded like with Cy Keeler singing. Anyway, I thought the songs sounded amazing. Steve Grimmett, as much as I love his voice, probably wasn't the best fit for that type of music. But nevertheless, that is the story behind that. So really cool. It's a very good group of re-recordings in that first half of the album. Now let's get to the second half. It's interesting because ever since doing this interview with Nige, I listened to probably every Motorhead album this past couple weeks, actually. Yeah, since we did the interview. It was about a week ago now. And they do a cover of Iron Fist, which is actually one of the singles they picked off of this compilation. That cover is awesome. And after talking about Motorhead with him, I realized again how much I miss Lemmy. Anyway, I digress. Let me go back into what I'm getting into. So there are a list of covers, and there is a story behind each of these covers. Now, the thing is, I talked to Nige about this. I didn't want to go through each individual track, but if you look in this compilation, there are a lot of covers from punk bands: Discharge, The Exploited, The Dead Kennedys, just a lot of more punk covers. And obviously you have the Motorhead cover, right? So when you listen to Onslaught's music, like most of the thrash bands that are out there, the Bay Area scene, even the East Coast scene, like Overkill and like Anthrax, and you get to like a lot of the bands, from Germany, most of them, you hear a combination of punk music and obviously traditional heavy metal mixed in there. And, most of those bands too were huge Motorhead fans. So most of those thrash bands, you hear some of that, you hear some of that punk edge to it, but you hear mostly traditional metal mixed in there, and you hear a lot of Motorhead influence in many of them. With Onslaught, there is more of the punk influence and Motorhead influence than maybe the traditional metal influence, which is why you see more punk covers on this in this album. And I've always taken that from their sound. If you go and listen to the last album they put out, Generation Antichrist, you hear a lot of that. I always hear a lot of Motorhead and punk music in their sound mixed with a little bit of traditional metal. So they've been a much different band sound-wise than most of the thrash bands that have come along over the last, 40 years. So that's why you see a majority of those covers on there. Now, it's interesting because the covers he picked, the punk covers didn't surprise me, but one song in particular surprised me. It was a Judas Priest cover. Now, most people, when they cover Judas Priest, they don't really cover this song too often. I was actually shocked but he covered the song Freewheel Burning. Now, I went and talked to Nige Rocket about all these covers and the stories behind them. Check out this interview clip where he talks about each of these bands that he covered and why he picked many of these particular songs, including Freewheel Burning, War Pigs, and all of the punk covers that are on here. Check out this interview clip. Well, I'm not going to go into each individual cover that you did, but I would like to talk about the bands you covered or what influence they had on you, because I think, the interesting thing about Onslaught and what really makes the band unique for me, if you listen to a lot of the other thrash bands at the time, the Bay Area bands, maybe a lot of the German heavy metal bands and the bands from Europe and stuff, like everyone talks about Sodom and Creator and all these bands, and they had a little more heavy metal, straight ahead classic heavy metal sound, a classic heavy metal sound to their music. Onslaught has kind of had a little more of the punk edge to their music. Like when I go and listen to, say, the first song off of Generation Antichrist, I can hear that in your music. And then when you look at the covers, who do you have on there? You have Motorhead, you have Discharge, The Exploited, Dead Kennedys, things like that. So a lot of these punk covers like Discharge and The Exploited and the Dead Kennedys, and these punk bands, how big of an influence? Because I know that was very big in Britain, in the late 70s, early 80s. Yeah. How much influence did these bands have on you? Why did you choose those specific songs from a lot of these punk bands that were out that influenced your music?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I grew up on. I was into punk music from like 12 years old. First punk album I bought was Sex Pistols the day it was released, and that was like the biggest eye opener for me probably in my life. I was listening to kind of stuff like T-Rex, The Sweet, and David Bowie, and maybe a little bit of Queen, maybe back in those days. And then all of a sudden this album came out of nowhere, and it was just like, what the fuck is this? This is like mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing at the time, because there was nothing even ever close to sounding like that record. Yeah, it changed my life musically from there on, and it was like I got into punk massively after that. Then the second wave came, which was even more aggressive and angry than the Pistols and the Damned and the Clash. They were kind of political, but this had a lot of anger when the second wave came with Discharge and The Exploited and things like that. And that really, because I was like kind of getting to that rebellious age then, when that really meant a lot to me personally as well.
Yeah,
so that was a massive influence on the band, and I used to follow those bands around with Paul, who I formed the band with. We used to follow Discharge, Exploited, GBH all over the UK. We got to know them. We used to get on the guest list for shows. We used to travel everywhere by whatever means, just to see these bands. And that was the influence to start a band for us. Like, we're following these bands over, let's make our own one, which is exactly what we did.
Well, it's interesting because when I look at the list of bands, all the thrash bands out there pretty much have that same list. Yeah. You kind of have a little more of the punk edge. The one band, what's really funny? The one band everybody universally loves in the thrash metal world is Motorhead. And that's actually the first, and it's actually one of my favorite bands ever. What kind of influence did a guy like Lemmy and that band have on you? You picked the song Iron Fist, which I think is cool because, you don't really see people cover that song too often. And I'm curious why you picked that specific song.
Well, the kind of Motorhead story started obviously when we used to go to our youth club, because we used to have to bully the DJ to play like all this punk music. So he'd play like 15 minutes of punk music or 20 minutes of punk music just to keep us quiet, in amongst all the disco and pop kind of music he had to play. But I remember the single Motorhead coming out, and it was like punk as fuck in a way, and obviously inspired bands like Discharge, and it kind of turned full circle.
Sure.
And they just had that raw punky edge, but a lot of melody in there. And once we started relearning the Power from Hell album to play live, I didn't realize how much influence Motorhead had on the songwriting. You may not notice it, or the fans may not notice it too much, but when I started playing all this stuff, listening to the key changes, I thought, wow, that's real kind of Motorhead like key change there, or little bits of that. And I was like, wow, I surprised it was like maybe some subconscious influence, but it was like really there quite a lot, because there's some really kind of rock and rolly key changes in Power from Hell. Not that you think about it, but I could hear the Motorhead influence very strong in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the Iron Fist thing is a different story altogether. I mean, I've learned No Sleep from Hammersmith album helped me and my guitar player massively. I just love that album so much. It had such a great vibe, more so than their studio albums. Had a great sound on it. And I learned that album from start to finish, solos, everything, and it really helped me improve my playing doing all that. But when we were fortunate enough to go on tour with them in Europe on the Orgasmatron tour. It was 86 or 87, and Filthy had just come back in the band, so it was really special for us, like to have him there as well. But we arrived at the first date where we joined the tour was in Zurich in Switzerland, and we just rolled up at the venue just as they were about to sound check, and we walked in. We just stood by the desk. The other guys came out and they were waiting for Lemmy to appear. Even at soundcheck, he was so cool. Like he came out, grabbed his bass off the tech, like, and just stamped his foot on the floor 4 times, and they just crashed into Iron Fist for soundcheck. And it was like, fuck! It was like pinned to the back wall, man. I'd never heard nothing like it at the time. It was like so fucking loud and so powerful. It was just absolutely blew us all away. It was like we just looked at each other. It's like, what the fuck is this? And that memory sticks in my head for forever, you know. Such a great song as well. So that's why we included that, because it was just they were so good to us, and that song had to be included just for that memory, you know.
Yeah. And then you did a Judas Priest cover on here, and it is a song that I cannot remember. I don't think I've ever heard a band cover it. I could be wrong, but you picked Freewheel Burning. Now, a lot of people pick a lot of other different Judas Priest covers to play. You guys decided to play that specific song, first song off of Defenders of the Faith, which is an interesting cover, because a lot of people would cover The Sentinel, for example, or maybe a different song off that album, but you picked Freewheel Burning. I'm interested to hear your story behind that.
That was down to me again, and my pursuit of becoming a more proficient guitarist.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that track for the first time, and I just loved the vibe of it. I loved the aggression of it and the power, and the solo coming. I thought, wow, this is absolutely incredible. So I'd learned all the Motorhead stuff off there, which is kind of a different level to Priest in terms of guitar solos. I mean,
right.
Motorhead, very rock and roll bluesy type solos, and then the solo on Freewheel Burning is a lot more full on metal type shredding stuff,
Sure.
I thought I got to learn this solo. I have to learn this solo. So I think it took me a fucking long time. Basically, I even slowed the record down at the beginning just to get the notes and get the phrasing and what's going on before I could speed it back up and jam along with it.
Yeah.
I nailed it in the end. It took me a long time, but I was so chuffed when I actually nailed it and I've got this, and it improved and taught me a lot of things about playing lead guitar at the time. So that's why that track was included on the album. Plus, it was my favorite Priest track, and it still is.
I'll be honest with you, it's probably close to being my favorite Priest album, but I was actually surprised when I saw that as a cover. But just because it's not a typical song people would probably cover by that, even though it's very good.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. But it learned loads for me. improved my playing no end, and taught me all sorts of different things about soloing. So
yeah. Well, and I'll ask you one more question about the covers before I get into my next set of questions I'm going to ask you. You have Black Sabbath, War Pigs, obvious choice. I mean, probably the most influential band in metal. What impact? Everybody has a different story of how Black Sabbath influenced them. You know, some people, will even talk about the Dio years. Some people will talk about the first couple albums. For you, why War Pigs? Very common song for people to typically cover, but what's your story behind that track?
I think it's just got a unique vibe about the song, but it was the lyrics that really grabbed me,
Yeah.
Being that kind of ilk of a song, it was very relevant lyrically, and the music when I first heard it was almost secondary. But then once you see beyond, I was listening to the lyrics and see beyond that, and then it's an incredible song. It's not the most energetic Sabbath song, not the most lively or aggressive song, but it just got something very dark about it. And we used to jam it at rehearsal a lot, just because it was so cool, it's not intricate, it's not going to improve our playing a great deal, but it was just a song that had that vibe. It was so heavy and powerful, and like I said, the lyrics just were incredible. So we have took it up a notch or two in tempo wise, just to give it a bit more of a say thrashy feel, but it certainly brings it to life a lot more. And I just that was it. The lyrics sold it for me straight away.
And that's Nodge Rocket talking about the different covers and everything on this album. So we talk about a lot in that interview. We talk about the U.S. tour they did with Neil Turbin, which when I saw him kind of drop his head a little bit, probably something that he doesn't want to think about. We talk a lot about the band's history. I talk about in that interview with him about how he found his current singer, Dave, who is just a phenomenal vocalist for this band. And we talk about, possibly working on an upcoming album. And Nige also had some medical issues related to performing on stage. Sadly, he did bring that up a little bit. I didn't want to go too deep into that, but it sounds like it was very similar to some of the medical issues Tom Araya had from Slayer, just from, banging his head on stage over the years. So it's a really great album. I love the updated re-recorded versions of many of the older songs, and I like a lot of the covers they picked. The Iron Fist cover, hands down, best one there. They picked that as a single. That was the song I probably would have picked as a single as well. But that cover of Free Wheel Burning is really cool. I was actually shocked at how good that was, because when I saw that, I thought to myself, this is interesting, because this was not what I expected. But, obviously in that interview clip I just played, he touches on that. So I'd give this compilation, as I call it a compilation because, these aren't original songs, but they are re-recordings. So I give these re-recordings. I'll tell you what, I normally don't like re-recordings. I'm 50-50 on them. I give this thing a 9 out of 10. It's really that good. I think if you are an Onslaught fan and you like the old stuff, I think they did some very good updated versions of those songs. And I think the covers they picked, I can't go look at the list of covers they picked and say to myself, well, I don't like any of them, because all of them are very, very well done. And I like all the original songs as well. He picked some really, really great songs by some of these bands. Some of them not as well known as some of the other songs those bands put out. So I thought it was cool. So 9 out of 10 for me for the upcoming Onslaught album, Origins of Aggression. Now let's move on to the last subject for today's episode, something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and that is the new W.A.S.P compilation. And they put a compilation out. It's digital only. Again, when you get, these reissues are always done as something to help bring the back catalog back into the news, into focus, get more people to stream the songs. People always make this thing like, oh my God, it's a cash grab. Well, yeah, it's a cash grab. They want people to focus and stream those tracks to get revenue. Keep in mind, folks, that streaming is 84% to 85% of all music revenue. So you're going to do reissues. So they have this, WASP has this compilation that has come out digitally. They have a box set that came out with reissues of these albums. And of course, these B-sides and bonus tracks on it. Has a really beautiful book. I do not own it yet, but it is out. And I've heard all these tracks before because I have the original reissues from when they came out in the early 2000s. But W.A.S.P is a band that I've absolutely loved. Blackie Lawless, easily one of the smartest people I've ever spoken to. One of the most knowledgeable people about the music industry. And for those of you that follow my show, I've played some clips of him talking about the music industry, some of them from 10 or 11 years ago, where he pretty much predicted the predicament we would be in now. And he's always been a great guy to speak to. So they have a single out for this. The song they're focusing on is the Paint It Black cover. That was actually in a bonus track on the reissue of the first W.A.S.P album. And obviously they have Animal Fuck Like a Beast. They have Mississippi Queen. They have a lot of really great B-sides on there. But it's always interesting because I remember when I went and first ended up getting those reissues. The reissue of the first W.A.S.P album had Animal as the first track, which when you go through the liner notes, it was intended to be on that album. But back then, you had censorship, you had the PMRC, you had I think it was, what was it called? The Filthy 15. I remember as a kid of all these parental advisory stickers on, all of these albums, and like Twisted Sister was on the list. Iron Maiden was on this shit list. You had Megadeth on there. I think In My Darkest Hour was like one of the songs because allegedly they tried to say that it promoted people giving themselves a dirt nap. Just all sorts of nonsensical stuff. And W.A.S.P was obviously one of the biggest targets. If you actually read the liner notes in a lot of these reissues, I think it might have been the reissue of The Last Command. He talks about the FBI telling him he shouldn't live alone, right? So Blackie wrote some great liner notes in there, but realistically, all of the W.A.S.P albums from the first album, really there isn't an album I dislike by them, I guess you could say. But all of the albums in that box set they put out, all of those records are phenomenal. Even Electric Circus, I think, is very good. I know some people don't care for that one too much, but I think that album is actually pretty solid, to be fair. 9-5 Nasty is a great song. The title track's a great song. I mean, generally speaking, the early W.A.S.P albums and all the albums in that box set are all extremely good. I looked at the box set. It looks really cool. Keep in mind, folks, as I just said, it's great for bands to reissue their stuff every now and then. Now, they're not going to make a bunch of physical product. They're not going to make tons of money from that. But that stuff is put out for the collectors. You still have people like myself, for example, who would collect something like that. But the reality is, it's a promotional tool. It is to put the band's name back in the news, in the algorithms on social media. And, let's face it, there may be people that have never heard that stuff before. Or maybe they want a physical copy of this stuff and it's been out of print and it's hard to get. Well, you get physical copies and you were able to get that now. Not to mention, let's face it, until this box set came out, I probably hadn't listened to anything by them in quite some time, probably maybe a year or two. But now, because this compilation came out, I'm here talking about it. And that was the whole intention of it happening to begin with. So they're really promoting the song Paint It Black. I think the cover's really, really good, actually. I think that's a great single to pick out, to be honest. And, one of the things that labels always miss is what single they should put out. they always pick the wrong one. In this case, they picked the right one. The painted black covers are really cool. But overall, the box set looks really cool. The book that's in the box set's really the big thing that I would want, because I already have all the music. But that book looks really cool that's in there. So overall, this compilation is really cool. I dig it quite a bit. Let me look at some of the songs that are on it. Yeah, Mississippi Queen is on there. There's a song called Savage. That's a bonus track. That song's very, very good. But overall, it's cool. It brings these bonus tracks back into the light, into focus. Part of the reason, and what's interesting is I didn't own much of the W.A.S.P material until those reissues happened to come out at the right time when I was just getting into that band, in the late 90s, early 2000s. I remember Hell Dorado was actually the first album, and KFD were the first two albums I ever heard by him. I know that sounds crazy, but Hell Dorado back in the late 90s, I think it was 99, that album was being heavily promoted. It just came out. So I had Blackie on my show back then, and that's a long time ago, but for the first time. Great dude. We talked a lot of baseball. I went back and listened to that interview. It's pretty interesting. We were talking about baseball. We talked about heavy metal. We talked about that album. He gave me a huge history lesson behind the band. And even though I wouldn't rank that very high in their catalog, that experience, and the album's not terrible. I mean, it's pretty good, but it's not one of my favorites by them. Definitely it was a great experience talking to Blackie and getting to know more about the band's history. So all of these bonus tracks, I've been listening to these probably for over 25 years now. But it's great for people that maybe just be getting into the band, or if you maybe haven't heard these in a long time. I think it's a great thing that they brought this back into the light. And I think putting out that box set looks really cool. So that's where I stand on it. If you haven't ever heard these bonus tracks, by all means, if you stream music, hit up Spotify or any of the streaming apps to check out these bonus tracks. Savage is a good one. The Mississippi Queen song cover is a good one. And, of course, the single Painted Black is phenomenal. So, great job by them. I'm glad they're bringing that out. W.A.S.P, again, one of my favorite bands. Crimson Idol, The Headless Children, Electric Circus, The Last Command, first album. All of these albums are classics. And if you haven't ever revisited them or even heard them before, I suggest checking them out. They're really good. Headless Children, probably my favorite W.A.S.P album, but Crimson Idol, some of the later stuff they did is probably my favorite. Last Command is a phenomenal album too. So that's all I have for today for the Metal Command podcast. If you like what you see in here, of course, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.